The ritual chamber smelled of pine smoke and old stone. Kellen Ashford knelt on cold flagstone, his knees pressed against rock, worn smooth by 100 years of ceremonies just like this one. The chamber stretched above him, Gothic arches disappearing into shadow. Torchlight threw dancing patterns across walls carved with symbols he was only beginning to understand. 200 men stood in silence around the perimeter. Brothers of the Covenant, all of them. Warriors, leaders. Men who'd survived Normandy and Bastogne, who'd come home from war and found they couldn't fit back into the world they'd fought to save. So they'd built this place instead. High in the Rockies where the air was thin and civilization was a 2-day ride down mountain roads that washed out every spring. Kellen had lived among them for 3 years, served them, stayed invisible. But tonight, every eye in the chamber was fixed on him. The hand on his left shoulder was Lysander's. Kellen could feel the calluses through the thin fabric of the ceremonial robe they'd given him. Rough hands, soldiers' hands, hands that had held rifles and thrown grenades, and more recently held Kellen himself with a gentleness that still made his breath catch. The hand on his right shoulder was Theron's. Warmer somehow, the grip firmer, more protective. Theron always touched like he was afraid Kellen might vanish if he let go. By blood and bond, Lysander's voice cut through the silence. Deep, authoritative, the voice of a man who'd commanded troops and never doubted they'd follow. We claim you as ours. By strength and honor, Theron continued, his voice rougher, more emotional. We name you our chosen. Kellen trembled. He couldn't help it. The weight of 200 stairs, the gravity of what was happening, the sheer impossibility that he was here at all. 3 months ago, he'd been nobody. A servant who refilled water pitchers and swept floors, who kept his eyes down and his mouth shut and counted himself lucky to have a roof over his head and regular meals. Now he knelt before the entire brotherhood while the 2 most powerful men in the Covenant claimed him as their mate. His heart hammered against his ribs. The torchlight blurred. For just a second, Kellen's vision tunneled, and he was somewhere else entirely. A different moment. 3 months passed. How did it come to this? The private dining room was warm in the way rooms get when they hold too much silence. Kellen moved along the perimeter, a ghost in simple servant's clothes. Gray wool pants, gray linen shirt, both worn soft from washing. His feet made no sound on the thick carpet that muffled everything in this part of the castle. The Patriarch's wing, where servants entered through side doors and left before they were noticed. He approached the long table where Lysander and Theron Winterborn sat across from each other, papers spread between them. Maps mostly. Supply routes, guard rotations. The business of running an isolated compound of 200 men required constant attention. Kellen filled Lysander's water glass first. Crystal, not pottery, like the brothers used in the main hall. The water came from a spring higher up the mountain, so cold it made your teeth ache. Thank you, Lysander said without looking up. 2 words. Kellen had learned to treasure them. Most patriarchs didn't thank servants at all. It wasn't cruelty, just hierarchy. The way things had always been done. But Lysander always said thank you. Kellen moved to Theron's side, filled his glass. Theron glanced up, made eye contact, smiled. Small, barely there, just a quirk at the corner of his mouth. But real. Kellen's chest tightened. He looked away fast, moved back toward the sideboard where dinner waited under silver covers. His hands shook slightly as he lifted the first plate. Roasted venison, potatoes, carrots from the compound's gardens. Simple food but good. Everything at the Covenant was simple but good. He served Lysander first. Set the plate down with careful precision. Then Theron. Then retreated to his position by the wall, hands clasped behind his back, ease on the middle distance. The way he'd been taught. Invisible. That was the goal. Be useful, be clean, be silent, and for God's sake, be invisible. It was harder than it should have been. Because Kellen Ashford had been nursing a hopeless, foolish crush on both Winterborn twins for the better part of a year, and invisibility was getting more difficult by the day. He watched them from the corner of his eye. Couldn't help it. Lysander ate with military precision, knife and fork moving in practiced rhythm. His dark hair was cut short, almost severe, showing the strong bones of his face. 32 years old, and he moved like a man who'd never known softness. Broad shoulders that filled his simple black shirt, eyes like winter sky, pale gray, that saw everything and gave away nothing. Theron was identical in every physical way. Same face, same build, same coloring, but somehow different. The way he held himself was looser. When he smiled, which wasn't often, it transformed his whole face. Made him look younger. Almost approachable. Almost. Because these were the twin patriarchs, co-leaders of the Covenant, men who'd earned their positions through combat and cunning and sheer force of will. Men who commanded absolute loyalty from 200 hardened warriors. And Kellen was a 21-year-old servant boy from a coal town in West Virginia who'd arrived at the Covenant 3 years ago with nothing but the clothes on his back and a photograph of his mother and siblings in his pocket. The crush was biological. Had to be. His body responding to powerful men the way bodies sometimes did. It didn't mean anything, couldn't mean anything, except lately he'd started noticing things. The way Lysander's jaw tightened when he was angry. How he clenched his fork just slightly harder, the only outward sign of emotion he allowed himself. The way Theron's voice dropped half an octave when he was tired. Late at night after long days managing the compound, when his guard came down. The way they moved around each other with perfect synchronization, finished each other's sentences, communicated in glances that needed no words. Kellen had watched them for 3 years, had learned their patterns the way you learn weather. And somewhere along the way, watching had become something else. Wanting. He wanted to know what they talked about when they were truly alone. Wanted to hear Lysander laugh, something he'd only witnessed twice in 3 years. Wanted to see Theron smile, that real smile, the one that lit up his whole face directed at him. Wanted things he couldn't even articulate. Things his sheltered upbringing in a coal town had never prepared him for. His skin felt hot. The room was too warm, suddenly the air too thick. Kellen shifted his weight, tried to focus on being still, being invisible. Across the table, Lysander's head came up, sharp, alert. Theron's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. They both looked at Kellen simultaneously. The attention hit like a physical thing. Two pairs of identical, pale gray eyes fixed on him with sudden, complete focus. Kellen's breath caught in his throat. "Kellen," Lysander said. His voice was careful, controlled. "Are you feeling well?" "Yes, sir," Kellen managed. His voice came out rough. "I'm fine, sir." It was a lie. He wasn't fine. Something was wrong. His skin felt like it was pulled too tight over his bones. The simple servant's clothes that had been comfortable this morning now chafed at his neck, his wrists. And underneath everything, a weird restlessness that made him want to move, to run, to do something. Theron stood. The movement was fluid, controlled, but fast. "You're flushed," he said. "Come here." It wasn't a request. Kellen's feet moved before his brain caught up, crossed the carpet to where Theron stood beside the table. Up close, Theron was even more imposing, 6'3", shoulders like a linebacker. Kellen had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. Theron's hand came up, pressed against Kellen's forehead. The touch was gentle, clinical, but Kellen felt it everywhere. "You're burning up," Theron said. He looked at his brother, Lysander. Lysander was already standing, already moving around the table. He stopped close enough that Kellen could smell him, wood smoke and leather, and something clean and sharp underneath. "When did you last take your suppression dose?" Lysander asked. The question hit like cold water. Kellen's stomach dropped. "Oh no, oh God." 4 days ago, he whispered. "Sir," the physician was called away. Emergency in the lower barracks, some kind of flu outbreak. He said he'd be back in 3 days, but he's not back yet, and I thought I could wait. I thought I'd be fine. 4 days, Theron repeated. His hand was still on Kellen's forehead. "And you're in full crisis now." Crisis. That was the word they used. Clinical. Distant. Better than the old words, the crude ones Kellen had grown up hearing in the coal towns. Better than the shame his mother had whispered about when she'd explained what would happen to him if he wasn't careful. The Covenant had rules, structure. Initiates like Kellen, the ones who came from nothing, who needed protection and purpose, they took suppression herbs. Twice a week, every third day without fail. The herbs kept them calm, docile, prevented the crises that could make a young man vulnerable. Kellen had been taking them for 3 years, regular as breathing, until 4 days ago when the physician had left and Kellen had thought stupidly that he could wait just one more day. Now the crisis was here. He could feel it building under his skin like a storm about to break. The fever, the restlessness, the way his body felt wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. "I'm sorry," Kellen gasped. "I'll go. I'll lock myself in my quarters. I won't disturb you. I won't." "Stop." Lysander's voice cracked through the room like a whip, not loud. He didn't need volume, just pure authority. Kellen froze mid-step. His body responded before his mind, every muscle locking in place. That was the power of a true patriarch. Command that bypassed conscious thought and went straight to instinct. "You can't go through a crisis alone," Lysander said. He moved closer. Now Kellen was caught between them, Lysander in front, Theron behind. "It's dangerous. You know that." "I've been through crises before," Kellen said. His voice shook. "I'll be fine. The herbs, they make it manageable. I'll sleep through it. I'll have you, Theron interrupted. His hand slid from Kellen's forehead down to cup the back of his neck. Warm, steady. Have you actually been through a crisis, or have you been drugged unconscious while your body suffered? Kellen flinched. Because it was true. The suppression herbs didn't prevent crises. They just sedated you through them, kept you compliant and quiet and mostly unaware while your body went through its biological imperative. He'd spent every crisis for 3 years in a chemical fog, barely conscious, certainly not experiencing the full intensity of what was happening. This would be different. This would be real. And he was terrified. We can't let you go through this alone, Lysander said. His pale eyes were fixed on Kellen's face. It's not safe. Then I'll find another brother, Kellen said desperately. Even though the thought made him want to weep. The idea of some random warrior using his body while he was vulnerable, then walking away. Someone appropriate. Someone who won't. The growl that came from both patriarchs made Kellen's knees buckle. It wasn't loud, wasn't aggressive, but it was pure dominance, pure possession, and it hit some primal part of Kellen's brain that had nothing to do with logic. His legs gave out. He would have fallen if Theron hadn't caught him, strong hands gripping his upper arms from behind. No, Theron said. The word was granite. Absolute. You will not give yourself to some random brother who would use you and discard you. Then what do you suggest? Kellen's voice came out small, pleading. He hated it but couldn't stop. I can't just not have a crisis. My body won't allow it. It's already starting. I can feel it. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Kellen could feel both patriarchs behind and in front of him, could smell them leather and smoke and sweat, could feel the heat coming off their bodies. His own scent was changing. He knew it even if he couldn't smell it himself. The crisis was releasing pheromones, chemical signals his body was broadcasting without permission. Fear, yes, but underneath it need, desperate biological need that had nothing to do with what Kellen wanted and everything to do with what his body demanded. Lysander, Theron said quietly, we need to discuss this. Agreed, Lysander said. His hand settled on Kellen's shoulder. The touch was careful, grounding. Kellen, go to your quarters and stay there. Lock the door. We need to talk, and you need to be somewhere safe while we do. But my duties, Kellen protested weakly. Dinner, the evening service, are suspended until further notice, Lysander said. Firm, but not unkind. Now go, quickly, before this gets worse. Kellen went. He fled through the corridors of the patriarch's wing, down the back stairs servants used through passages that smelled of stone and lamp oil. His quarters were in the East Tower small room servants shared. But Kellen had seniority after 3 years. He had a room to himself, barely bigger than a closet but private. He made it inside and locked the door, collapsed onto his narrow bed. The crisis was building fast now. His skin burned. When he pressed his thighs together, he could feel wetness there. Slick, his body preparing itself for something he'd never experienced. Kellen was a virgin, 21 years old and completely untouched. It wasn't unusual. The Covenant took in young men from desperate situations, protected them, gave them purpose and safety, but also structure. Hierarchy. Initiates didn't fraternize with brothers. The power dynamic made it inappropriate. There had been brothers who'd expressed interest. Suggestions subtle but clear. But Kellen had always refused, partly from fear. Partly because none of them had made him feel anything but vague discomfort at their presumption. And partly because when Kellen let himself fantasize late at night in his narrow bed, it was always pale gray eyes and dark hair, and 2 voices deep and commanding that featured in his desperate imaginings. Now lying on his bed while his body betrayed him, Kellen let himself think it. What would it be like to be claimed by both of them, to have not one but 2 patriarchs focused on him? On his pleasure, his satisfaction, his complete and utter surrender. The thought sent heat flooding through him. More slick gathered between his legs. His hand moved without permission, pressing against the ache through his clothes. Even through fabric, the pressure made him gasp. He'd touched himself before, of course, but never like this. Never with such desperate need. Never with his body producing slick in preparation for penetration he'd never experienced. Never while imagining exactly whose hands should be doing this. A knock at the door made him freeze. Kellen? Theron's voice muffled through wood. May we come in? We both of them. Kellen's heart hammered. His whole body shook. I'm not decent, he called out. His voice cracked on the last word. We don't care about decent right now. Lysander's voice came through the door, calm, controlled, but deeper than usual. We need to talk to you. It's important. Kellen forced himself to stand, to smooth his disheveled clothes even though he knew it was useless. They would smell his arousal, would know exactly what he'd been doing, what he'd been thinking about. He unlocked the door. They filled his small room completely. Two large men in a space meant for one. Kellen's quarters were Spartan. A bed, a chair, a small desk. A window that looked out over the mountains. Nothing else. Nothing personal except the photograph he kept in the desk drawer. Lysander and Theron stood just inside the doorway. They'd removed their formal jackets. Stood in just shirts and trousers. Somehow that made them more imposing, not less. Kellen could see the breadth of their shoulders, the strength in their arms. Could see the tension in their bodies. They were holding themselves rigidly controlled. "Why, we've discussed the situation," Lysander said without preamble. Direct, that was Lysander. "And we have a proposal." Kellen waited. He couldn't form words, could barely breathe. "You need a partner to help you through this crisis," Theron continued. His voice was rougher than his brother's, more emotional. "And we won't allow you to be used by someone who doesn't care about your well-being." "So we're offering ourselves," Lysander finished. "Both of us." The world tilted. Kellen grabbed the doorframe for support, staring at them in shock. "Both of you," the words came out strangled. "But I'm just a servant. You're patriarchs. It's unusual," Theron agreed. He took a step closer. "But not unprecedented. We've always shared our partners, Kellen. We wouldn't know how to be any other way. And we've both been drawn to you," Lysander added. His pale eyes were intense on Kellen's face. "For longer than we should admit. Your crisis has only made it impossible to deny." "You want me," Kellen repeated. He couldn't process this. It was too big, too impossible. "Both of you want me?" "Yes," they said in unison. The combined weight of their attention made Kellen's knees weak all over again. "But I've never," he stopped, started again. "I'm a virgin. I don't know how to please even one partner, let alone two. I don't know what to do or how any of this works. I'd disappoint you." "You couldn't disappoint us if you tried," Theron said gently. He moved closer until he was within arm's reach. "And we would guide you through everything. Teach you exactly what we like, what you like. Take care of you the way someone in crisis deserves to be cared for." "This is just the crisis," Kellen said desperately, grasping for any logical reason to refuse what his body was screaming at him to accept. "Once it passes, you'll regret this. You'll realize it was a mistake." "No," Lysander said, firm, absolute. He moved closer as well until Kellen was effectively trapped between both of them, drowning in their combined scent. "This isn't just crisis madness, Kellen. We've wanted you for months. Your crisis has simply forced us to be honest about it." "Tell us what you want," Theron urged. His hand came up, cupped Kellen's burning cheek. The touch sent electricity through Kellen's entire body. "Not what you think you should say, not what's proper or appropriate. What does your body crave right now?" The touch was everything. Kellen leaned into it helplessly, his eyes fluttering closed. A whimper escaped his throat before he could stop it. "You," he whispered, the truth raw and desperate. "Both of you, I want both of you so badly I can't think straight. But I'm scared. I don't know how to do this." "Then let us show you," Lysander murmured. His hand settled on Kellen's other cheek, so the young man's face was cradled between both patriarchs. "Let us take care of you the way you deserve. Let us satisfy this crisis and see where it leads after." Kellen opened his eyes, found both patriarchs watching him with identical expressions of want and tenderness. Something in his chest cracked open. "What if I can't handle both of you?" he asked, voicing his deepest fear. "What if I'm not enough?" "You are more than enough," Theron assured him. His thumb stroked across Kellen's cheekbone. "You're perfect, Kellen, and we would never push you beyond what you can handle. This is about your pleasure, your comfort, your needs." "Say yes," Lysander urged softly. "Let us worship you the way we've been fantasizing about for months. Let us show you what it feels like to be cherished by two men who want nothing more than to see you satisfied." And Kellen, drowning in crisis and want, and the overwhelming rightness of having them both so close, finally let his walls crumble. "Yes," he breathed. "Please, I need you, both of you." The sound both patriarchs made was pure satisfaction, pure triumph. Then Theron was kissing him, claiming his mouth with firm confidence, and Kellen melted into it helplessly. He'd never been kissed before, had no idea what he was doing. But Theron guided him patiently, coaxing his lips open so his tongue could explore. The sensation was overwhelming. Kellen whimpered into the kiss, his hands coming up to clutch at Theron's shirt. Behind him, Lysander pressed close. His hands settled on Kellen's hips, while his mouth found the sensitive place where neck met shoulder. The dual sensation was devastating. Kellen's legs threatened to buckle again. "We've got you," Lysander murmured against his skin. "We won't let you fall." They guided him toward the bed, working together with seamless coordination, the result of a lifetime of moving as one unit. Theron sat first, pulling Kellen into his lap. Lysander settled behind, bracketing the young man between their bodies. It should have felt crowded, overwhelming, but instead it felt perfect, safe, right in a way nothing else ever had. "You're trembling," Theron observed. His hands ran soothing patterns up and down Kellen's sides. "Nervousness or crisis?" "Both," Kellen admitted. His voice shook. "I don't know what to do, how to please you." "You please us by being honest about what you need," Lysander said. His hands joined his brother's, mapping Kellen's body through his clothes. "Your pleasure is our pleasure. Everything we do is for you." The endearment in their voices made Kellen's breath catch. They weren't treating him like a conquest, like something to be used. They were treating him like he was precious, something to be treasured. "Can I confess something?" Theron asked. His hands stilled. "We've been going slowly mad these past months, watching you serve us every day, wanting to touch you, to smell you properly, to see if you tasted as sweet as we imagined." "You've thought about me?" Kellen asked, shocked. "But I'm just—" "Don't say you're just a servant," Lysander interrupted, firm. "You're intelligent and kind and beautiful, and your scent has been driving us to distraction for months. We've shown remarkable restraint, actually. We've wanted to bend you over our dining table more times than I can count," Theron added bluntly, making Kellen gasp. "Wanted to find out what sounds you make when you're pleasured. Wanted to see you come apart in our hands." The crude honesty of it sent heat flooding through Kellen's body. More slick gathered between his legs, soaking through his undergarments. He knew they could smell it, could sense his arousal intensifying. "That's it," Lysander praised. His nose found the scent gland on Kellen's neck, breathing deep. "Don't hide from us. Let us smell how much you want this." "We're going to undress you now," Theron said. His hands moved to the buttons of Kellen's simple servant shirt. "Tell us if you want us to stop." Kellen didn't want them to stop. He wanted them to hurry, to give him what his body was screaming for. But they were patient, methodical, removing each piece of clothing with care, praising what they revealed. "Look at you," Lysander murmured when Kellen's chest was finally bare. His hands came around from behind, tracing patterns across smooth skin, making the young man arch into the touch. "Perfect." "So responsive," Theron agreed. He leaned forward, pressed kisses across Kellen's collarbones. "And we've barely touched you yet." When they finally removed the last barrier, Kellen's soaked undergarments, he burned with embarrassment at the evidence of his arousal. But both patriarchs made sounds of approval, deep rumbles that vibrated through his bones. "Beautiful," Theron said reverently. His hand slid between Kellen's thighs, feeling the slick there. The young man's hips bucked at the contact, a desperate whine escaping his throat. "So wet for us already. Your body knows what it needs, doesn't it?" "Need you," Kellen gasped, beyond coherent thought. The crisis was building to unbearable levels, his body demanding to be filled, to be claimed, to be knotted. "Please, I need—" "Shh," Lysander soothed. His hands were gentle, even as his voice had gone rough with desire. "We'll give you everything, but first we're going to prepare you properly. Make sure you are ready for us." They maneuvered him onto the narrow bed. It wasn't meant for 3 people, but they made it work. Arranged him on his hands and knees between them. Kellen had a moment of self-consciousness, being so exposed, so vulnerable. Then Theron's hand touched his back, warm and grounding, and the self-consciousness faded. "Such a pretty sight," Theron said. His voice was thick with want. "Never seen anyone so desperate before." "That's because he's ours," Lysander said. Possessive. He was behind Kellen now, hands spreading the young man's thighs wider. "And we're going to take very good care of him." What happened next shattered what remained of Kellen's innocent understanding of pleasure. Lysander's hands and mouth explored him with focused intensity, finding places that made the young man sob with need. Theron positioned himself in front, and when he guided Kellen's mouth to where he wanted it, the servant went willingly, eager to please. "That's it," Theron praised as Kellen followed his murmured instructions. "Take what you can. We'll teach you the rest." Caught between them, overwhelmed by sensation and the twin scent of patriarch arousal mixing with his own crisis-soaked desperation, Kellen felt his understanding of the world reshape itself. This was what he'd been missing. This completeness. This rightness of being claimed by two men who worked in perfect synchronization to drive him higher. Behind him, Lysander's preparations were thorough, patient despite Kellen's whimpered pleas for more. Not yet, the patriarch kept saying. You're not ready yet. Trust me. In front of him, Theron guided his movements with gentle hands and rougher words, praising and commanding in equal measure. Relax your throat. That's perfect. Look at you taking me so well. Our beautiful boy. The combination was devastating. Kellen had never felt so owned, so worshipped, so utterly consumed. When Lysander finally deemed him ready and began to press inside, the young man's whole body went rigid with the overwhelming sensation of being filled for the first time. Breathe, Lysander commanded. His hands were soothing on Kellen's hips. I've got you. Just breathe through it. The stretch was intense, bordering on painful. But the slick eased the way, and Kellen's crisis-addled body accepted the intrusion eagerly. When Lysander was fully seated, they both groaned at the perfect fit. So tight, Lysander gasped. Never felt anything like this. How does it feel? Theron asked. His hand was gentle in Kellen's hair. Having a man inside you for the first time, Kellen couldn't answer, couldn't form words. He could only whimper and tremble as Lysander began to move, each thrust sending waves of pleasure-pain through his virgin body. It was too much and not enough, overwhelming and exactly what he needed. Then Theron was urging him back to his task, and Kellen found himself split between them. Caught in a rhythm they orchestrated with seamless coordination. One would thrust while the other held steady, then they'd switch, keeping the young man in constant motion, constant sensation. Look at him, Lysander said roughly, taking us both so perfectly. Like he was made for this. For us, Theron corrected, made for us specifically. The possessiveness in their voices sent Kellen spiraling higher. His body was adjusting to the intrusion now, pain giving way to pure pleasure. He could feel something building inside him, something bigger than the small releases he'd given himself alone in his bed. This was different. This was consuming. He's close, Lysander observed. His hand reached around to where Kellen's neglected arousal stood rigid. The first touch sent shockwaves through the young man's body. Aren't you going to come for us? Kellen tried to nod, tried to indicate yes, but Theron was demanding his attention again, and he couldn't coordinate enough to do both. The pleasure built and built, Lysander's movements becoming more demanding, his grip on Kellen's hips certainly leaving marks. The young man didn't care, wanted the marks, wanted proof this was real. Come, Lysander commanded. His hand worked in time with his thrusts. Come for us now. Then Kellen, overwhelmed by sensation and the weight of their combined attention and the sheer rightness of being claimed by both of them, fell over the edge into the most intense release of his life. His body clenched around Lysander. His throat worked around Theron, and he felt something shift inside him. Some fundamental change as his first crisis-driven climax crashed through every nerve. Through the haze, he felt Lysander's movements become erratic, felt the beginnings of swelling that meant, going to knot you, Lysander warned. His voice was strained. It'll be intense, but you can take it. You were made to take me. And when that thick swelling finally locked into place, stretching Kellen impossibly wider, the young man came again from that alone, his body accepting its purpose with devastating eagerness. Theron followed moments later. His release filled Kellen's throat as the young man swallowed instinctively, not knowing what else to do. They collapsed together in a tangle of limbs, Lysander still locked deep inside Kellen's body. Theron gathered them both close. The bed was too small, but none of them cared. Kellen was shaking with aftershocks, overwhelmed by everything that had just happened, but feeling more satisfied than he'd thought possible. Breathe, Theron murmured, kissing his sweat-dampened forehead. You did so well. Took us both perfectly. How long? Kellen managed to ask. His voice was wrecked. He could feel Lysander's knot pulsing inside him, could feel the patriarch's continued release flooding his body. 20 minutes or so, Lysander said. He sounded equally breathless. My knot will go down and then we can separate, for a little while anyway. For a little while, Kellen repeated weakly. Your crisis isn't done, Theron reminded him gently. This was just the first wave. There will be more. Many more. But we'll be here for all of them, Lysander added, his arms tightened around Kellen's waist, taking care of you, satisfying you, keeping you safe. Kellen's crisis-fogged brain tried to process this. More. More of what they'd just done. More of being claimed by both of them. More of pleasure so intense it bordered on pain. Can't, he whispered. Too much. Can't possibly. Both patriarchs laughed, low and dark and full of promise. Oh, Kellen, Theron said. His hand cupped the young man's cheek. That was just the beginning. By the time your crisis is done, you'll be begging us for more. And as Kellen felt his body already stirring with renewed need, despite his exhaustion, felt more slick. Gathering in preparation for the next round, he realized with a mix of terror and anticipation that they were absolutely right. The crisis would last 3 days, and he would spend every moment of it claimed by the twin patriarchs. His life would never be the same. The crisis lasted 72 hours. Kellen lost track of time somewhere around hour 30. The small window in his quarters showed day turning to night, turning to day again. But it all blurred together, a haze of sensation and need and overwhelming satisfaction that his innocent mind had never imagined possible. They moved to the patriarch's chambers after that second round. Kellen's narrow servant's bed was clearly inadequate for what they needed. The royal suite was massive by comparison. A bed large enough for 5 men, let alone 3. Thick carpets that muffled sound. A private bathing room with a tub carved from mountain stone fed by hot springs deeper in the compound. It was luxury Kellen had only glimpsed when cleaning. Now he lived in it, breathed it, was surrounded by it while the twin patriarchs took turns keeping him satisfied. Sometimes it was Lysander, cool and controlled, even in passion, taking Kellen with methodical precision, finding the angles that made the young man gasp, learning his body like a map to be memorized. Sometimes it was Theron, warmer, more vocal, praising every sound Kellen made, every response. His hands gentler, but his words rougher, the combination devastating. And once when they'd prepared him thoroughly enough, it was both, taking turns keeping him full while the other recovered. The synchronization was perfect. One would thrust deep while the other held steady, then they'd switch, keeping Kellen in constant motion, constant pleasure, until he couldn't tell where one patriarch ended and the other began. Between the intense rounds of crisis-driven coupling, they talked. Kellen learned about their childhood. Twin boys born to a patriarch father and a mother who died bringing them into the world. Raised together, trained together. Never separated, not even in war. They'd fought side by side through France and Germany. Had come home decorated heroes who couldn't fit back into civilian life. We tried, Lysander said during one quiet moment. They were in the massive bathtub, Kellen floating between them in water that smelled of pine and minerals. Went to college on the GI Bill. Lasted 1 semester. Couldn't stand the crowds, Theron added. His hands were washing Kellen's hair with surprising gentleness. Or the questions, or the looks from people who had no idea what we'd seen. So you built this place, Kellen murmured. The water was making him drowsy, satisfied and clean and warm for the first time in days. We found it, Lysander corrected. The covenant was started by men who came back from the First War. World War I, they couldn't reintegrate either. Built this compound as a refuge. We just continued their work. A place for men who don't fit, Theron said quietly, who need structure and purpose but can't find it in the regular world. Like me, Kellen said. Like you, they agreed. The young man learned about their philosophy. The covenant wasn't a cult despite what some outsiders whispered. It was a brotherhood, a hierarchy, yes, but one based on merit and contribution. You earned your place through work and loyalty and skill. Initiates served, yes, but in exchange they received protection, education, purpose. A path to becoming brothers if they proved themselves. Some chose to leave once they'd saved enough money, learned enough skills. The covenant didn't stop them. Others stayed forever. What about you? Lysander asked during another quiet moment. Night this time, the 3 of them tangled together in the massive bed. Tell us about before. So Kellen told them about the coal town in West Virginia where he'd grown up, about his father dying in a mine collapse when Kellen was 12, about his mother working herself to exhaustion in the company store, about his younger siblings, Sarah and Tommy, bright kids with no future in a town that was slowly dying. I presented when I was 18, Kellen said quietly. The crisis had faded enough that he could think clearly, talk without his voice shaking. My mother knew what that meant. Young men like me, we had options, none of them good. The breeding houses, Theron said, not a question. His arms tightened around Kellen. Or private sale to someone with money, Kellen confirmed. There was a merchant who came through, made an offer. Good money, enough to keep my family fed for 2 years. But you didn't take it, Lysander said. The covenant recruiter came through the week before, offered a different option. 3-year service contract, room board education, send money home to my family, and at the end a choice. Stay or leave with enough skills to make my own way. So you came here, Theron said. So I came here, Kellen agreed. Told my mother I'd come home safe, made her a promise. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Lysander spoke, his voice rough. If we'd known you existed 3 years ago, we would have moved heaven and earth to find you, would have claimed you the moment you arrived. You were 29 when I presented, Kellen pointed out, finding the age gap both thrilling and slightly absurd. You wouldn't have wanted a scrawny village boy. We would have wanted you at any age, Theron corrected, would have recognized our mate the moment we scented you. Mate. The word still felt surreal, even as Kellen lay between them in their bed, even as his body ached pleasantly from their thorough attention, even as their scents had mixed with his until he couldn't tell where one ended and another began. What happens when the crisis ends? Kellen asked on the third night. His voice was small in the darkness. Do I go back to being a servant? Do we pretend this never happened? Both patriarchs went rigid on either side of him. Absolutely not, Lysander said, firm, final. You're our mate, Kellen, our claimed partner. You'll move into these chambers permanently. You'll be consort to the leadership. But I'm not nobility, Kellen protested. I don't know anything about being a consort. I can barely read. I don't know covenant law or history or protocol. I'll embarrass you. Nishkasam, Theron interrupted. He turned Kellen to face him in the darkness. We don't care about any of that. We'll teach you what you need to know. And anyone who has a problem with our choice of mate can deal with us directly. The threat in his voice was clear. Kellen realized with a start that they were serious. They truly intended to make him their permanent mate, to elevate him from servant to consort, to claim him publicly despite every social convention that said it was inappropriate. I love you, Kellen blurted out, the words escaping before he could stop them. Both of you. I know it's too soon. I know it might just be the crisis making me feel this way, but I love you. I've loved you for months, maybe longer. And I'm terrified that when the crisis ends, you'll realize this was a mistake. Never, Lysander said fiercely. He pulled Kellen back against his chest. This is the opposite of a mistake. This is the most right thing we've ever done. We love you too, Theron added. His hand found Kellen's in the darkness. Both of us have loved you for longer than we should admit. Your crisis didn't create these feelings. It just forced us to stop denying them. Kellen wanted to believe them, wanted to trust that this perfect dream could continue beyond the artificial intensity of his crisis. But years of being told he was lesser, being treated as invisible, had left scars that 3 days couldn't completely heal. As if sensing his lingering doubt, Lysander pressed a kiss to the claiming mark on Kellen's neck, the spot where he'd bitten down during one of the more intense rounds, making the young man shiver. When your crisis ends tomorrow, Lysander said softly, we're going to prove to you that this is real. We're going to court you properly. Show you that we want you for more than just crisis management. We're going to spend every day showing you how much you mean to us, Theron agreed. And then when you're ready, when you truly believe that we love you, we're going to have a bonding ceremony. We're going to declare to the entire brotherhood that you're ours and we're yours. The promise in their voices made Kellen's throat tight with emotion. He turned his head to kiss Lysander, then twisted to kiss Theron, pouring everything he felt into those kisses. Gratitude and love and hope and a fragile trust that maybe, just maybe, this could be his reality. The crisis broke the next morning. Kellen woke to sunlight streaming through the massive windows in a strange clarity to his thoughts that had been absent for days. The desperate, all-consuming need was gone, replaced by pleasant soreness and deep satisfaction. He could think clearly for the first time since his crisis had begun, could process everything that had happened without the fog of biological imperative clouding his judgment. He was in the patriarch's bed, naked between two equally naked men who were still sleeping peacefully. He had claiming marks on both sides of his neck, visible proof of what they'd done, and he'd told them he loved them. Panic tried to surface. What had he done? What had he agreed to? This was insane, impossible, destined to end in disaster. Stop thinking so loudly, Lysander murmured. His eyes were still closed. I can practically hear your anxiety from here. On Kellen's other side, Theron stirred. His arm tightened around the young man's waist. Still having doubts, he asked, voice rough with sleep. I'm terrified, Kellen admitted honestly. My crisis is over. You could change your minds now, could realize this was a mistake and send me back to the servant quarters. And I don't know if I could survive that. Both patriarchs' eyes snapped open at that. Identical storm-gray gazes focusing on him with intensity that stole his breath. Look at us, Theron commanded gently, waiting until Kellen met his eyes. Do you feel our bond? Kellen did. Now that the crisis haze had cleared, he could feel it distinctly. a connection to both patriarchs, a sense of their emotions, their presence in his mind and heart. It was faint still, new and fragile, but undeniably real. That's not crisis-driven, Lysander explained. His hand covered one of Kellen's claiming marks possessively. That's the bond created by our claiming. It will only grow stronger with time. You're ours now, Kellen, permanently. And we couldn't send you away even if we wanted to, which we absolutely do not. But what if, Kellen started. Theron cut him off with a kiss, firm, possessive. When he pulled back, his eyes were serious. No more what-ifs. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to bathe and eat a proper meal. Then we're going to spend the day showing you exactly how serious we are about this. We're going to introduce you to the Brotherhood as our intended mate. Start the process of making this official. Today, Kellen squeaked, but I'm not ready. I don't know what to say or how to act. I'll ruin everything. You'll be perfect, Lysander assured him, and we'll be right beside you the entire time. Anyone who disrespects you disrespects us, and nobody is foolish enough to do that. They spent the morning pampering him. The bath was large enough for all three of them, and they washed him carefully, tending to the soreness from his crisis with gentle hands and healing oils. They fed him breakfast in bed, an absurd spread of food that Kellen could never have eaten alone but that the three of them demolished together. And then they dressed him. Not in his servant's uniform, but in fine clothes befitting a consort. Soft fabrics in deep blue that brought out his eyes, tailored to fit his slighter frame perfectly. Someone had clearly prepared this in advance. The clothes fit too well to be coincidence. We had these made weeks ago, Theron admitted when he saw Kellen's shocked expression. We'd been planning to court you properly, to ask permission to pursue you. Your crisis just accelerated the timeline. You were going to court me, Kellen asked, still unable to quite believe it. Even before the crisis. We'd been gathering courage for months, Lysander said with a self-deprecating smile that transformed his usually stern face. Trying to figure out how to approach you without abusing our power as your employers. Your crisis forced our hand, but we don't regret it. They escorted him to the Great Hall, one on each side, their hands at the small of his back in a gesture of support and possession. The Brotherhood was already assembled, 200 men in formal attire, warriors and leaders who'd been summoned for this announcement. Kellen's heart hammered as they entered, every eye turned to them, taking in the sight of the twin patriarchs with a servant between them, the claiming marks visible on Kellen's neck despite his high collar. The weight of judgment was crushing. We have an announcement, Lysander said. His voice carried through the chamber with absolute authority. Kellen Ashford has accepted our bond. He is our mate, our claimed partner, and will be consort to the leadership. The silence that followed was deafening. Kellen could feel the shock. The whispered questions about propriety and bloodlines and suitability. Then the Chancellor stepped forward, an elderly man who'd served the Covenant for decades. Gray-haired and scarred from 2 wars, Kellen braced for condemnation, for the voice of reason that would point out all the ways this couldn't work. Instead, the old man smiled. Finally, he said warmly. His voice was rough but genuine. We've been waiting for you two to find a mate for years. Welcome, Consort Kellen. May your bond bring strength to our patriarchs and prosperity to the Brotherhood. The formal blessing seemed to break the spell. Other brothers stepped forward, offering congratulations, some genuine, some clearly forced. But the message was clear. The twin patriarchs had made their choice, and anyone who opposed it would face their combined wrath. Through it all, Lysander and Theron stayed close, their hands never leaving Kellen, their sense wrapping around him like a protective barrier. But not everyone was pleased. Kellen saw him across the hall. Victor Blackwood, 28 years old and born to one of the founding families of the Covenant, handsome in a sharp-edged way, cold blue eyes that tracked Kellen with barely concealed hostility. Their eyes met across the crowd. Victor smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, and his hand, Kellen noticed with a chill, rested on the knife at his belt. The casual threat was clear. The next weeks were a whirlwind. Kellen officially moved into the royal chambers, his few possessions looking absurdly small in the massive space. The patriarchs insisted on buying him new clothes, new books, everything he might need or want. They hired tutors to teach him reading and writing Covenant law and history, everything a consort should know. But more importantly, they courted him. Lysander brought him wildflowers every morning, fresh blooms from the mountain meadows that he arranged himself in Kellen's favorite vase. Simple gestures, but meaningful. Proof that he paid attention to what Kellen liked. Theron played piano for him in the evenings, Old songs and new compositions that he'd written specifically for his mate. The music was beautiful, haunting. It made Kellen's chest ache in the best way. They took him on walks through the compound grounds, on horseback rides through mountain trails, on quiet evenings in the library where they'd read to him until he fell asleep between them. They made love to him too, but differently than during the crisis. Now it was slow and tender, focused on connection rather than desperate need. They learned his body in new ways, discovered what pleased him when biology wasn't driving every touch. And Kellen learned them in return, grew confident in touching them, in initiating intimacy, in expressing his desires without fear of rejection. But shadows gathered at the edges of their happiness. Victor Blackwood appeared more frequently, always with plausible reasons, offering help with Kellen's education, suggesting ways to improve the consort's standing with the Brotherhood. His words were correct, respectful even. But his eyes were cold, calculating, and Kellen never felt safe when Victor was near. 6 weeks after the crisis, the royal physician returned. He'd been gone dealing with the flu outbreak in the lower compound. But when he arrived at the Patriarch's chambers for Kellen's follow-up examination, his hands shook. "I need to tell you something," the old doctor said. His voice was strained, "about why I left when I did." Lysander and Theron exchanged glances. "Speak freely," Lysander commanded. "I was threatened," the physician admitted. "Someone came to me the night before I left, told me I needed to be gone for at least 4 days, that if I wasn't, my grandson in the lower compound would have an accident." The temperature in the room dropped. "Who?" Theron's voice was granite. "I don't know," the doctor said miserably. He wore a mask, but he knew things, personal things, about my family, about the Covenant's inner workings. He had to be someone high-ranking. After the physician left, Lysander and Theron held a private council. Kellen could feel their anger through the bond, their determination to find who was responsible. But they didn't share the details with him. And that hurt more than Kellen expected. "Don't shut me out," he said that night, his voice sharper than intended. "I'm your mate, not a child. If someone is threatening us, I have a right to know." The patriarchs exchanged guilty looks. "You're right," Lysander said finally. "We were trying to protect you. But that was wrong." "There's a conspiracy," Theron admitted. "Someone wanted you to have an unsuppressed crisis. We think they hoped it would make you look weak, desperate, unfit to be a consort. But it backfired," Lysander continued, "because we saw your vulnerability as strength, saw the real you instead of the suppressed version you'd been showing us for years." "Do you know who?" Kellen asked. "Suspicions," Theron said carefully. "But no proof. We're investigating quietly. Until we know for certain, we need you to be careful. Don't go anywhere alone, especially not with anyone you don't trust completely." Kellen thought of Victor's cold eyes, his calculating smile. "I'll be careful," he promised. But being careful wasn't enough. The bonding ceremony was set for 8 weeks after the crisis ended. Time for Kellen to complete his basic education. Time for the Brotherhood to adjust to the idea of a servant becoming consort. Time for the patriarchs to formalize the legal and administrative changes. The preparations were elaborate. The entire covenant was invited. Formal robes had to be commissioned. The great hall decorated. Food and drink arranged for 200 guests. Kellen was nervous. Excited too, but the nervousness dominated. "I'll embarrass you," he said one night. They were in their chambers reviewing the ceremony protocol for the dozenth time. "I'll say the wrong words or trip on my robes or do something to prove I don't belong." "You belong because we choose you," Lysander said firmly. "That's all that matters." But Kellen's anxiety only grew as the ceremony approached, and Victor Blackwood's presence became more frequent, more oppressive. The man had a way of appearing when Kellen was alone, in the library, in the gardens, always with that cold smile and those calculating eyes. "You're doing well with your studies," Victor said one afternoon. They were in the library, theoretically both researching Covenant history. "For someone with your background." The condescension was subtle but clear. "Thank you," Kellen said carefully, keeping his eyes on his book. "Must be overwhelming," Victor continued, "going from servant to consort in a matter of weeks. Some might say it's too fast, that you're not ready for the responsibility." "The patriarchs believe I'm ready," Kellen replied, his voice steady despite the fear curling in his gut. "That's what matters." "Of course," Victor agreed, but his smile was sharp. "Though one wonders what will happen when the novelty wears off, when they realize a pretty face and crisis desperation aren't enough to build a partnership on." The words hit like physical blows. All of Kellen's deepest fears given voice. "Is there something you want to say?" he asked quietly. "Only that the Covenant has standards," Victor said. He stood moved closer. "Traditions that matter. Bloodlines that have been carefully maintained for generations. Some of us question whether those traditions should be thrown aside for, he paused deliberately, passing fancy. I'm not a passing fancy, Kellen said, but his voice shook. The patriarchs love me. Do they? Victor asked. Or did they enjoy having a willing body during a crisis? There's a difference, you know, between love and lust, between a mate and a convenient outlet. Kellen stood abruptly. I should go. The patriarchs are expecting me. Of course, Victor said smoothly. Run back to your protectors. Just remember, Kellen, when this falls apart, and it will, you'll have nowhere to go. You've burned your bridges with the servant class by sleeping your way to the top, and you'll never truly be accepted as consort. You'll be nothing. Nobody. The words followed Kellen all the way back to the royal chambers, burrowed into his mind like poison. What if Victor was right? What if this was just novelty? What if he really wasn't enough? He didn't tell the patriarchs about the conversation, told himself it was nothing, just jealousy from someone who'd been passed over. It didn't mean anything, but that night, lying between Lysander and Theron, Kellen couldn't sleep, couldn't quiet the voice in his head that whispered Victor's words over and over. Passing fancy, convenient outlet when this falls apart. The bonding ceremony was in 2 days, and Kellen had never felt more uncertain about his place in the world. The night before the bonding ceremony, Kellen couldn't sleep. He stood at the window of the royal chambers looking out over the compound. Moonlight painted the Gothic architecture in silver and shadow. 200 men slept in these buildings, warriors who'd survived wars and come here seeking purpose, men who would witness his bonding tomorrow, men who would judge whether a cold town servant belonged at the side of their patriarchs. Behind him, Lysander and Theron slept peacefully in the massive bed, their breathing deep and even. They tried to stay awake with him, but exhaustion from ceremony preparations had finally claimed them. Kellen was glad. He needed this moment alone with his thoughts. Victor's words from the library still echoed. Passing fancy, convenient outlet, not enough. What if he was right? What if Kellen had fooled himself into believing this could work? He could read now, yes. Could write his name and understand basic covenant law. But he was still the same scared boy from West Virginia who'd arrived with nothing. How could he possibly be consort material? A hand touched his shoulder. Kellen startled, turning to find Theron behind him. The patriarch's hair was mussed from sleep, his eyes concerned. Can't quiet your mind, Theron asked softly. Just nervous, Kellen said. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Theron's arms wrapped around him from behind, pulling him back against solid warmth. Talk to me. What's really wrong? And maybe it was the late hour or the moonlight, or the fact that in 12 hours everything would be permanent and irreversible. But Kellen found himself talking. What if I'm not enough? The words came out small, broken. What if Victor's right and I'm just a passing fancy? What if you wake up one day and realize you made a mistake? Theron went very still. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. What did Victor say to you? It doesn't matter. What did he say? More forceful now, the command of a patriarch who expected answers. So Kellen told him about the library encounter, about Victor's poisoned words, about the fear that had been building ever since. By the time he finished, Lysander was awake too, standing on Kellen's other side, his face carved from stone. Fury rolled off both patriarchs in waves that Kellen could feel through the bond. Victor Blackwood has been warned twice about his behavior toward you, Lysander said. His voice was ice. Apparently he needs a more direct lesson. No, Kellen said quickly. Please, don't make this a bigger issue. Tomorrow is supposed to be about our bond, not about someone threatening our mate, Theron interrupted. That's exactly what tomorrow's about. Declaring to the Brotherhood that you're ours, that anyone who threatens you threatens us. Come with us, Lysander said. It wasn't a request. They dressed quickly. Simple clothes, not the formal attire of patriarchs. They moved through the compound like shadows, Kellen between them. Down corridors he'd learned to navigate. Through passages that smelled of stone and lamp oil. Victor's quarters were in the noble wing, rooms reserved for those from founding families. Larger than servant quarters but smaller than the patriarch's chambers, a reminder of status without the burden of leadership. Lysander knocked. Hard, authoritative. The kind of knock that said, open this door immediately. Victor answered in his nightclothes, hair disheveled. His eyes widened when he saw who stood outside. Patriarchs. I wasn't expecting. We need to talk, Theron said. His voice was pleasant, conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. May we come in? It wasn't really a question. They entered before Victor could respond, Kellen following reluctantly. Victor's quarters were neat, almost austere. Books lined the walls, a desk covered in papers. Everything in its place. The room of someone who valued control. I understand you had a conversation with our mate today, Lysander said. He didn't sit, didn't make himself comfortable, just stood there radiating controlled fury. In the library, Victor's face went carefully blank. We discussed Covenant history, nothing more. You told him he was a passing fancy, Theron said flatly, that he wasn't good enough, that he'd be nothing when we tired of him. I may have expressed some concerns about tradition, Victor started. You undermined his confidence the day before our bonding ceremony, Lysander interrupted. His voice was still controlled, but barely. You deliberately planted seeds of doubt in someone who's already struggling with it feeling worthy. Why? The silence stretched. Kellen could see Victor weighing his options. Finally, something in the man's composure cracked. Because you should have chosen me, Victor said. The words came out raw, honest. I'm from a founding family. I've served the Covenant my entire life. I've been loyal and dedicated, and I've done everything right. And you chose a servant, someone with no education, no breeding, no understanding of what it means to lead. You think birth determines worth? Theron asked quietly. I think tradition exists for a reason, Victor shot back. The Covenant was built by men of honor and breeding. Maintaining those standards matters. Standards, Lysander repeated. The word was sharp, cutting. You mean the same standards that nearly got Kellen killed? Kellen's head snapped up. What? Victor's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. We found evidence you bribed the physician's assistant to delay his return, Theron said. His eyes were locked on Victor. The same assistant who accidentally destroyed the suppression herbs supply for the entire month. You didn't just force Kellen's crisis. You made sure he couldn't get help from anyone else either. We had guards follow you after Kellen mentioned your conversation, Lysander added. They found the leather pouch used to pay off the assistant, hidden in your quarters. Your initials are stamped inside. The color drained completely from Victor's face. You searched my room. We're patriarchs, Theron said flatly. When we suspect conspiracy against our mate, we have that authority. Kellen felt like the floor was dropping out from under him. You threatened the physician. You forced my first crisis. I thought if they saw you at your most desperate, most pathetic, they'd realize their mistake, Victor said. His voice was bitter, now defensive. Crisis breaks people, makes them weak. I thought they'd see you weren't fit to be consort. But it backfired, Lysander said, because we saw his vulnerability as strength, saw the real him instead of the suppressed version he'd been showing us. You were supposed to look desperate, Victor continued. He was unraveling now, words spilling out. Like you were using the crisis to manipulate them. Instead, they fell for it, fell for you. And I've had to watch for 2 months while you took everything that should have been mine. It was never yours, Theron said. His voice was hard, final. We never wanted you that way, never even considered it. The words hit Victor like a physical blow. He staggered back, face twisting with rage and humiliation. You're exiled, Lysander said. Effective immediately. You'll be escorted to the eastern outpost at dawn. You'll serve there for a minimum of 2 years. If you show genuine remorse and personal growth, you may petition to return. But you will never hold a position of authority again. You can't, Victor started. We can, Theron interrupted. We're patriarchs. This is our covenant, and you endangered our mate. Be grateful exile is all you're getting. Victor's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Kellen thought he might attack, might do something stupid and violent. But then the man's shoulders slumped, defeat written in every line of his body. I loved you, Victor said quietly, looking at both patriarchs, both of you, for years, and you never even noticed. We noticed, Lysander said, not unkindly, but love isn't something you can force. We didn't feel that way about you. We're sorry if we gave you false hope. Leave at dawn, Theron added. Guards will escort you. Pack light. They left Victor's quarters in silence, walked back through the compound without speaking. Only when they were safely in their own chamber's door, locked behind them, did anyone break the quiet. I'm sorry, Kellen said. His voice was shaking. I should have told you about the library conversation immediately. If I had, this isn't your fault, Lysander interrupted firmly. He pulled Kellen into his arms. Victor made his choices. You did nothing wrong. He loved you, Kellen said. Both of you. And you chose me instead. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm not. Stop, Theron said. He joined the embrace, sandwiching Kellen between them. Victor was obsessed with an idea, with status and tradition and what he thought he deserved. That's not love. Love is what we feel for you, what you feel for us. It's not about bloodlines or education or who deserves what. Tomorrow we're going to stand before the entire brotherhood, Lysander said. His hand cupped Kellen's face, tilting it up to meet his eyes. We're going to bond with you permanently. Make you our consort in every way that matters. Do you still want that? Kellen searched both their faces. Saw love there. Certainty, not a trace of doubt. Yes, he whispered, more than anything. Then get some sleep, Theron said gently. Tomorrow changes everything. The morning of the bonding ceremony dawned clear and cold. Kellen woke to Lysander and Theron already dressed, moving quietly around the chambers. They'd let him sleep as long as possible, but now it was time. How are you feeling? Lysander asked. He brought Kellen tea, the good kind from the patriarch's private stores. Terrified, Kellen admitted. Excited, both at once. Good, Theron said. He smiled, that rare expression that transformed his whole face. That's exactly how you should feel. They helped him prepare. The ceremonial robes were midnight blue, the same color as the clothes they'd given him that first day. But these were finer. Silk embroidered with silver thread in patterns that represented the Covenant's history, a high collar that would frame his claiming marks rather than hide them. The robes fit perfectly, made Kellen look older, more dignified, almost worthy of standing beside the twin patriarchs. Almost. Stop, Lysander said. He was watching Kellen's face in the mirror. Stop doubting yourself. You belong here. With us. I know, Kellen said, and he did know, intellectually, but feeling it was harder. Theron came up behind him, hands settling on his shoulders. Do you trust us? Yes, Kellen said immediately. That at least was true without question. Then trust us when we say you're exactly who we want, Theron said. Exactly who we need. Not despite where you came from, but including all of it. Your strength comes from what you've survived. Your compassion comes from knowing what it's like to have nothing. Those things make you a better consort than anyone born to privilege could ever be. The words settled something in Kellen's chest. The anxiety didn't disappear entirely, but it became manageable, bearable. I'm ready, he said. The great hall had been transformed. Hundreds of candles turned the Gothic space into something magical. White flowers from the mountain meadows decorated every surface. The Brotherhood stood in formal rows, 200 men in their finest clothes, and at the front the Chancellor waited, old and scarred and smiling. Kellen walked between Lysander and Theron, their hands at the small of his back, steady and sure. Every eye in the hall tracked their progress, but this time Kellen didn't feel judged. He felt witnessed. The ceremony was ancient, words passed down through generations of Covenant leadership. The Chancellor spoke of bonds that transcended blood, of choosing family rather than being born into it, of the strength that came from unity. Do you, Lysander and Theron Winterborn, twin patriarchs of the Aldenmere Covenant, take Kellen Ashford as your bonded mate? The Chancellor asked. His voice carried through the silent hall. To cherish and protect, to honor and respect for all the days of your lives. We do, they said in unison. Their voices strong, certain. And do you, Kellen Ashford, take Lysander and Theron Winterborn as your bonded mates, to stand beside them as consort, to share in their burdens and their joys for all the days of your life? Kellen's voice didn't shake. I do. Then by the authority granted to me as Chancellor of this covenant, the old man said, I declare you bonded. May your union bring strength to our leadership and prosperity to our brotherhood. The claiming marks had to be renewed publicly. Not bitten again, that would be excessive, but touched, acknowledged, made visible to the entire assembly. Lysander's hand settled on Kellen's left shoulder, fingers tracing the mark there. Theron's hand mirrored the gesture on the right. The touch was gentle, reverent, but the possession in it was unmistakable, and Kellen felt it. The bond that had been forming over the past 2 months suddenly snapping into place with devastating completeness. Not the fragile connection from before, something unbreakable. He could feel Lysander's steady strength, his absolute certainty in this choice, could feel Theron's fierce protectiveness, his joy at finally making this official. And they could feel him, his love for them both, his gratitude, his overwhelming relief that this was real, was permanent, was happening. Our chosen, Lysander said. The traditional words, but they sounded new, personal. Our mate, our heart. My patriarchs, Kellen responded. His voice was strong now, clear. My mates, my home. The great hall erupted in applause, not polite acknowledgement, genuine celebration, brothers cheering and stamping feet and calling out congratulations. The chancellor stepped forward, embracing Kellen with surprising strength for his age. "You remind us what this covenant was meant to be," he said quietly, meant only for Kellen's ears. Brotherhood, not hierarchy. Chosen bonds, not accidents of birth. Don't let anyone make you forget that. The celebration lasted through the day and into the night. Food and drink that the compound's cooks had been preparing for weeks. Music from brothers who played instruments. Dancing even though Kellen didn't know how and stumbled through it laughing while Theron guided his feet. But eventually the three of them escaped, back to their chambers, their home. "How does it feel?" Lysander asked. They were on the balcony overlooking the mountains. Stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. "Being officially consort. Surreal," Kellen admitted. "I keep expecting to wake up, to find out this was all a dream." "It's real," Theron promised, his arms wrapped around Kellen from behind. "You're ours, permanently. Nothing can change that now." "The bond," Kellen said. He could still feel it thrumming between the three of them. "It's so strong, I can feel everything you're feeling." "And we can feel you," Lysander said. He turned Kellen to face him, hands cupping his face. "Your joy, your love, your lingering doubts that you're enough." "I'm working on that," Kellen said with a small smile. "We have a lifetime to convince you," Theron murmured. His lips found Kellen's neck, pressing kisses along the claiming mark. "Starting tonight." They made love as bonded mates for the first time, the connection allowing them to feel each other's pleasure, to know exactly what the others needed. It was overwhelming and perfect, and everything Kellen had never dared to dream of. Afterward, tangled together in their bed, Kellen thought about how far he'd come, from a frightened village boy afraid of being sold, to a servant invisible in the castle, to this, cherished mate of two powerful leaders who loved him beyond reason. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Theron asked sleepily. "For seeing me," Kellen said simply. "For choosing me when you could have had anyone." "You changed us," Lysander said. "Made us better than we were." Kellen's second crisis arrived in late autumn when the mountains were painted gold and red. But this time everything was different. He wasn't alone in a small servant's room, terrified and unprepared. He was in the royal chambers with his bonded mates who'd been tracking his cycle carefully, who'd cleared their schedules in advance, who'd made sure he had everything he might need. When the first stirrings began, Kellen wasn't afraid. He was excited. "Ready for us?" Theron asked, his voice already dropping into that commanding tone that made Kellen shiver. "Always," Kellen breathed, reaching for both of them. "I'm always ready for you." This crisis was different from the first. No desperate virgin fear. No uncertainty about what was happening. Just the comfortable knowledge that his mates would take care of him, would satisfy every need, would keep him safe and cherished through every moment. And when they took him together for the first time, both of them inside him, simultaneously, Kellen finally understood what it meant to be complete. This was what he'd been made for. Not servitude or invisibility or selling himself to survive, but this, being loved by two men who saw him as precious, being part of a bond so strong that nothing could break it, being chosen, cherished, and claimed in every possible way. "I love you," he gasped as pleasure built to impossible heights, as his body stretched to accommodate both of them, as the bond flared bright with their combined emotions. "Love you both so much. Forever." "Forever," they promised in unison. Their movements synchronized perfectly, their hands on his body possessive and gentle simultaneously. "Our mate, our heart, our everything." And as Kellen shattered between them as pleasure crashed through the bond and fed back on itself until all three of them were crying out, he knew that he was finally completely home. The covenant had changed. Subtle shifts at first, Kellen's influence as consort starting small and growing. He remembered what it was like to be an initiate, to feel powerless and voiceless. So he created programs to help. Education classes for those who couldn't read. Not just practical skills, but literature, history, mathematics, giving initiates tools to rise in the hierarchy if they chose. A council where initiates could bring grievances without fear of punishment, where their voices were actually heard, better living conditions, more autonomy, more paths to advancement that didn't require being born to the right family. Some brothers resisted, called it coddling, said Kellen was destroying tradition. But Lysander and Theron backed every change, made it clear that Kellen spoke with their full authority, and slowly the covenant evolved, became less about rigid hierarchy and more about genuine brotherhood. Victor Blackwood's exile ended after 2 years. He returned different, humbled by isolation and hard labor at the eastern outpost. He requested a private meeting with Kellen, and though the consort was nervous, he agreed. I was wrong, Victor said. They met in the library where he'd once threatened Kellen. Full circle. About everything, about you, about tradition, about what makes someone worthy. I appreciate that, Kellen said carefully. You've made the covenant better, Victor continued. Stronger, more just. I was so focused on bloodlines and breeding that I couldn't see what actually mattered. Character, compassion, the willingness to do hard things for others. What will you do now, Kellen asked. I've requested assignment to the education program, Victor said. Teaching initiates to read. It's good work, important work, and I need to contribute something positive instead of just tearing others down. Kellen studied him, saw genuine remorse in his eyes. I'd like that, he said finally. Everyone deserves a second chance. They would never be friends, but they could be colleagues, could work together for the Covenant's good. That was enough. The Chancellor died that winter. Peaceful in his sleep at 87, his last words to Kellen were a blessing. You've reminded us what we were meant to be. Don't let them forget. Before he died, he named his successor. The announcement came at his memorial service read by his deputy before the assembled brotherhood. Not one of the noble-born brothers who'd expected the position, but Kellen. Chancellor Ashford believes Kellen Ashford understands what the Covenant needs, the deputy read. Not what it was, but what it can become. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the arguments began. 12 senior brothers on the council, each with opinions about why a servant-turned-consort couldn't possibly lead them spiritually and administratively. He's barely literate. This breaks every tradition. We need someone with proper breeding. Victor Blackwood stood. The hall quieted, shocked that the recently returned exile would speak. 3 years ago, I tried to destroy him, Victor said. His voice was steady, clear. Because I thought birth mattered more than character. I was wrong. He turned to face Kellen directly. You taught illiterate men to read, including you, when I returned broken from exile. You created justice where there was only hierarchy. You gave voice to the voiceless. You made this covenant what it was always meant to be. Victor looked around the council. If you reject him, you reject everything this place stands for. Brotherhood, not bloodlines, character, not accidents of birth. He bowed deeply to Kellen. Chancellor Consort, he said. One by one the council members stood, even those who'd opposed him loudest, even those who'd whispered that a servant could never lead. They bowed. Chancellor Consort, they echoed. Kellen looked at Lysander and Theron, tears streaming down his face. They smiled, proud, certain, unsurprised. This was always where he was meant to be. The compound looked different now. Still Gothic, still imposing, but softer around the edges. Gardens where there had been bare stone. A school building for the children of brothers who'd chosen to bring families into the Covenant. Kellen stood in his study looking at an old photograph, himself at 18 arriving scared and small. He barely recognized that boy now. Reminiscing, Lysander asked. He entered the study carrying tea, his hair now streaked with distinguished silver. At 59, he was still strong, still commanding, but gentler than he'd been at 32. Just thinking about how far we've come, Kellen said. He was 38 now, no longer the frightened servant, but a leader in his own right, confident and respected. Theron joined them, settling into his favorite chair. The new initiates arrived today, 12 of them, including 2 who specifically requested to come here after hearing about our programs. Good, Kellen said. That's what we wanted. A reputation as a place of opportunity, not just refuge. They'd transformed the Covenant over 17 years. It was still a brotherhood, still a hierarchy, but fairer now, more just. Initiates could rise based on merit. Education was universal, voices were heard. And at the center of it all, 3 men bonded so completely that none of them could imagine existing without the others. Do you ever regret it? Kellen asked. Not for the first time over the years. Choosing me, you could have had someone from a founding family. Someone who knew how to lead from the beginning. Not for a single second, Lysander said. He pulled Kellen into his lap, something that still made the younger man blush even after all these years. You were exactly who we needed, who we wanted. You transformed us as much as we transformed you, Theron added. He joined them, hand settling on Kellen's knee. Made us better leaders, better men. You gave us purpose beyond tradition, Lysander said. Showed us what the Covenant could become. Kellen looked at them both. These men who'd seen him when he was invisible, who'd chosen him when he had nothing to offer but himself, who'd loved him through doubt and fear and growth, his patriarchs, his mates, his home. I was already half in love with you both, he admitted, something he'd never quite said before. For months before the crisis, maybe longer, I just didn't think I was allowed to want what I wanted. And now, Theron asked, smiling. Now I know that some bonds are chosen, Kellen said, and those bonds last forever. They sat together as the sun set over the mountains. Three men who'd found each other against all odds, who'd built something beautiful from crisis and doubt and desperate need. The covenant would continue long after them, would evolve and grow and change, but it would always carry the mark of what they'd built together, a place where worth came from character, not birth, where bonds were chosen, not assigned, where even a servant from a coal town could become chancellor consort and transform everything, where three men could love each other completely without shame or hiding, where Kellen Ashford had finally permanently, irrevocably found home. The letter arrived in winter, 17 years after the bonding ceremony. Kellen opened it with hands that shook slightly. The return address was from West Virginia, from the coal town he'd left at 18. Inside, a single page in his mother's careful handwriting. She'd learned to write properly in her 50s, attending the classes the local church had started. Dearest Kellen, I hope this letter finds you well and happy. We received the photographs you sent of the covenant. It looks beautiful. I'm so proud of what you've built there. Sarah is married now to a teacher. They have 2 children. Tommy works in Charleston doing something with numbers that I don't quite understand, but that pays well. They ask after you often. I wanted you to know that I've never regretted letting you go, even though I missed you terribly. You've done exactly what I hoped. Found safety, found purpose, found love. The money you've sent over the years changed our lives. We'll never be rich, but we're comfortable, safe, and that's thanks to you. Come visit when you can. I'd like to meet the men who make you so happy, who saw what I always knew was there, that you were special, worthy of love. Your loving mother, Kellen, read the letter 3 times, then carried it to where Lysander and Theron were reviewing next year's budget. We need to take a trip, he said, to West Virginia. There's someone I want you to meet. They looked up, saw the letter, saw the tears on Kellen's cheeks, understood immediately. Of course, Theron said, whenever you're ready. I promised her I'd come home safe, Kellen said quietly. Took me 20 years, but I kept that promise. And I want to show her what came from it. Want her to see that her son didn't just survive, he thrived. Then we'll go, Lysander agreed. All 3 of us, as a family. The mountain road was muddy from spring thaw. The truck bounced over ruts Kellen wedged between Lysander and Theron in the cab. Nervous, Theron asked. Terrified, Kellen admitted. 20 years. What if she doesn't recognize me? She's your mother, Lysander said. She'll know you. The coal town looked smaller than Kellen remembered, dirtier, but the company store was still there, and behind it the small house where he'd grown up. His mother stood on the porch, gray-haired, now thinner, but her eyes, the same eyes Kellen saw in the mirror, lit up when the truck stopped. Kellen, she whispered. He crossed the yard in 3 steps, fell into her arms like he was 8 years old again. I kept my promise, Mama, he said against her shoulder. I came home safe. You did more than that, she said. She pulled back, looked at Lysander and Theron standing respectfully behind. You brought me sons. That night they sat around the kitchen table, the same table where Kellen had eaten as a boy. His mother served coffee, her hands shaking slightly. Tell me, she said, everything, how you found each other. So Kellen told her about the crisis that forced the truth, about the bonding that made it permanent, about the covenant they'd transformed together. His mother listened without interrupting. When he finished, she reached across the table, took his hand. When you left, I was terrified, and she said, thought I'd never see you again. Thought I'd sent my baby to be used by powerful men. She looked at Lysander and Theron. But you loved him, not despite where he came from, because of it. He saved us, Theron said simply, gave us purpose beyond tradition. He reminded us what strength really means, Lysander added. Kellen's mother smiled. Then you understand what I always knew. My son was special. They stayed 3 days, met Sarah and her children, met Tommy and his wife. Kellen showed them photographs of the covenant, told stories that made his family laugh and gasp. On the last morning, his mother walked him to the truck. You're happy, she said, not a question. Yes, Mama, so happy. Then I have everything I wanted. She embraced him one last time, then turned to Lysander and Theron. Take care of my boy. Always, they promised. They arrived home as the sun set over the mountains. The compound spread below, lights beginning to glow in windows. 200 men going about their evening routines. But it looked different now. felt different because Kellen had closed the circle, had shown his family what he'd become. On the balcony of their chambers, the three of them stood together. Watching darkness fall, stars emerge. "Do you know what I realized?" Kellen said. "Visiting home." "What?" Theron asked. "I left to find safety, but I found so much more." He looked at them both. "I found where I was meant to be." "And where is that?" Lysander asked, though he knew. "Here." Kellen's hands found theirs. "Between you, always." They stood in silence, watching the compound settle for night. Brothers in the great hall sharing evening meal. Initiates in their quarters studying by lamplight. Victor in the schoolhouse preparing tomorrow's lessons. The covenant, transformed from rigid hierarchy to genuine brotherhood, from tradition to chosen family. "Sometimes destiny arrives in unexpected packages," Theron said softly. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to force truth," Lysander added. "And sometimes," Kellen finished, "all it takes is the courage to claim what you want, and the courage to be claimed." 20 years since a frightened boy arrived with nothing. 20 years of transformation, struggle, love. And now standing between the two men who'd seen him when he was invisible, Kellen Ashford knew with absolute certainty he was home. Not the home he'd left in West Virginia, but the home he'd chosen, the home he'd built, the home that would last forever. Three silhouettes against the sunset, the compound below, mountains eternal, fade to black.